I believe that the best place to publish dApps is GitHub Pages, not just for development, but also for production. So GitHub Pages is a free service for open source projects that allow them to publish static websites like only HTML, CSS, and JS directly from GitHub repository. And since all dApps should always be open source, all dApps qualify. So GitHub Pages also supports custom domains, so the end result will be identical to other production publishing services. Another benefit of GitHub Pages is that it supports static websites only, that only run client-side. There is no backend that can run code or server-side rendering. This limitation is actually a feature for dApps because decentralized apps should never depend on backend services, as those are centralized. The last important feature for GitHub Pages that makes it particularly appropriate for dApps is that the reliance on a Git repo gives us many community governance features for free. For example, a group of maintainers can share the website deployment privilege easily because all of them have certain access to the repository. And outside collaborators from the community can submit pull requests and those can get merged. These community members can influence the live dApp. And lastly, if anyone from the community is unhappy with how this dApp is governed, they can always fork the GitHub repository and create their own independent client that can also be published to GitHub Pages in one click. So we have our web application locally. As we already just discussed, it is only a front side. So the back side is the contract and it qualifies as a dApp. So we are going to deploy it to GitHub Pages. And one important thing that we need to do, we would need to create a new repository. So we are going to push our code into this repository. And before we start with that, let's talk a bit more about how our repository will become actually like a web page that is hosted on GitHub repository. So, as you might have guessed, the GitHub Pages is very much connected to your GitHub account. So, let's assume you have the username. My username is Mark Ochman. And then you want to create a repository with a certain name that will be available as a first part of the path. So, we will just create this first contract frontend, and we'll create a new repository. So, we are going to actually start committing some parts of our code. It will be the whole code, but some parts of it will be treated very specially. So at this point, we can copy the URL to our GitHub repository, and we are going to head back into our project to run this amount of commands to actually initiate the Git repository, because we didn't work with Git from the scratch since we started the project. So I'm now in the root of our repository, of course. And what I got to do first is git init. So I have initialized the Git repository. From the Vite, we already have the git ignore file. So it's great. So what I'm going to do now is git add everything. I'm going to git commit with initial commit. And now I'm going to do git remote add, and I will call my remote origin. And I will add the link that I just copied from my GitHub repository. And also I'm going to just git push origin master. So I'm just going to make a first push of our initial code. But let's get back to GitHub and talk a little bit about how the GitHub Pages work. So basically, let's say we have a username and we have the name of our repository. So how is it going to work with website later on, the one that will be hosted on GitHub Pages? So it will be looking like this. So Mark Ochman, my username, is going to be used as a subdomain. And then I'm going to have github.io as a domain. And then I'm going to have the name of my repository. So it's going to be first contract frontend. Great. So basically, this is the future. And this is the reality that we have to actually prepare the website to be publishable like this. But before we go with that, let's remind ourselves that we also have to do the manifest. As you remember, you're still using my manifest file. So let's figure out how do we actually create the manifest file that is going to be also available under our public folder. So if we go to the main TS6 file, you can see that this is the URL of my manifest file. But why don't we just create a new one that is going to be placed in the public folder, and it is going to be called Ton Connect Manifest, just like this. So it will be Ton Connect Manifest JSON file. So we know the structure. It's going to be URL. I'm going to still use my website, but now at least you will know how to put it. So join toncompany.org. Then we go with the name. And my name will be Ton & Co tutorial. And then we go with the icon URL. And we want the icon URL to also be part of our repository. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to place an icon file here in the public folder. But later on, I will actually compose a proper URL here that would actually reference to this file once we deploy it. So let's go for it. So here's my icon PNG file. And I want to actually compose a URL here that will be pointing to this file. So it's going to be SSL certificate, of course, on GitHub. Then it's going to be my username, then github.io. And then it will be the name of the repository that we have. So it will be first contract front end. And then it will be the name of the file, icon.png, because the public folder is actually resolving to the root once we actually build the project. So these are our manifest file. And one more thing we need to do is we need to head to the main TS6 and also compose a proper URL here. So the manifest file will be now available under the HTTPS Mark Ochman GitHub.io, and then first contract front end, and then Ton Connect Manifest JSON. Great. So now we are composing the proper Ton Connect Manifest. It refers to a proper link to the icon file. And at this point, the last thing we need to do is to prepare the Vite itself to build properly for us. So as you can see here, the Vite config has a base. So this base is not going to be root because as you can see here, this is the base. Like this is just the rules of GitHub that the repository name is going to be the base path. So what we want to do is we want to head to the Vite and just put the repository name as the base for our project. So at this point, we are good with our existing code, but there is going to be one more thing that we need to do. So first of all, at this point, we are ready to run the yarn build. So we do yarn build. And what yarn build is supposed to do is it's supposed to compose our project into the servable files that are actually just executable in the browser, because as you can see, we have TypeScript and stuff, so obviously it cannot work in the browser, and we would need to build it. So here in the dist folder, we have the index.html that is actually having all the proper paths. It has all the files here. It is kind of bundled. But we don't want to do this every time that we do some changes and we push them to repository. So we don't want to actually do like yarn build and commit these files. If you even see that the contents of this folder, they are even git ignored. So on GitHub, the branch on each repository branch GH pages, like GitHub pages, is actually considered as the branch that is holding the contents of the website. So potentially we could just create a branch that would only have the contents of this file, of this folder, and this branch would directly be connected to the URL that we just described. But we want to do it a bit more optimized. So every time you push any changes from local machine to actually to the GitHub, you would want it to automatically be prepared so that automatically GH pages would be created and it would be built, and the contents of the dist would actually be present there. So for this, a cool thing that GitHub is empowering us with is the GitHub workflows. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a workflow that is actually going to do this job for us every time we push to the repository. So let's start with it. We are going to create a new repository called GitHub. Inside of it, we're going to create a folder called workflows. These are all standard names, so you cannot change them. And now we are going to create a file called deploy, and it has extension YML. So I'm pasting here the code. You can find it also in the attachments to this lesson. So we call it deploy. This workflow has to be triggered on any push that happens on the branch master. And then we start to define jobs. So first job will be build, second job will be deploy. So build, we just specify the environment that it runs on. You wouldn't need to install anything. It's all the GitHub terminology for the configuration, the syntax. And then there will be some steps. So you would have to check out the repo. You would have to set up the node for actually runtime. So set up the version of the node that you need. And you can actually do npm install on something. So basically the end result will be a build folder dist, just like we had it locally. But the next job will be deploy. And here we are actually providing the information on how we have to download the artifacts on this dist folder, and we actually have to deploy them into the GitHub pages. So it's going to check out and create the fresh new GH pages branch, and then it's going to actually deploy it into the GitHub pages. We're saving this file. As you remember, we already committed. So we check git status. So we updated one file, and let me check on the manifest. So we need to git add everything. We do git commit. Let me check the git ignore just to make sure that public folder is not ignored. Let me check the git ignore folder so we know that the public is not ignored. So we do git commit. And here in the git commit, we say that this is going to be the workflow. Great. So at this point, I have this workflow ready, but let me get back to the GitHub repository. And here I'm going to head to settings and make sure that my workflow it's called actions as well, yeah. So it's also having the read and write permissions because we are going to basically create a folder with files, right? So we save it, go here. Just want to check that, yes, we have icon, don't connect manifest. And the next step, we're just going to push whatever we committed, our workflow. And we're going to head back to our repository. So we head to the actions, and we can see that there's a workflow running. So this one, let me refresh. So we had 2 deploys in a row, and I believe the second one, this is the one that we will actually use because there was a few commits. So let's go to the deploy. and we'll check this workflow. So what is going on? It is now installing dependencies. Yeah, just like it was. Install dependencies. We'll build the project just like we did on the local machine. And the result of this workflow will be basically a new branch called dH pages. And every time we push something to main, it's going to run this workflow to actually create this, update this new branch, actually recreate this new branch. So it would have the latest build. And it will happen after we finish the deploy. Great, it finished. Let's go back. And here in the branches, we can see that GH pages branch was created. Just now, there was a new deploy on it. So if we are going back to master branch, yes, but first we would need to go to settings. Now we go to pages, and we would need to choose which branch should be used. So GH pages is the one that is usually chosen by default. And now we are heading back to the master branch, and we want to see one more action is running. And this action is something that actually going to deploy our dist folder, the contents of it is going to deploy it on our subdomain. Let's wait a moment. Let's see what happens there inside. It is deploying. Great. The best way to check it is go to pages. And here it is offering us a link to our website. So we're heading to this website and we see it is working just like on our local machine. We can even test it. Why don't we just connect our wallet and increase our counter value by 5 more? So I'm scanning the QR code and I'm requested to connect wallet. As you remember, we changed the manifest file. So now it is showing up with my icon, with the name, so I connect wallet. And now it is going to ask me to, yes, so I'm connected. And now I see the actionable buttons. So I can click increment by 5. And you can see this all happens on the domain. This is a published production app now. So I confirm the transaction. And once it catches up the blockchain data, it is going to have like 10. And you can see that our balance also increased because I used some money to actually deliver this transaction. So we've just deployed our first application to production. This is working the same way for the test and mainnet. So it's just up to you where you want to, what kind of credentials and code you want to push there. So at this point, you actually have a production application that is running on the publicly for people, but this is just web. And this is quite a good progress we made in the last few chapters. So before I announce to you what we are going to do in next lessons, let me give credits to Orb's team, and namely Shahar Yakir and Tal Kol, because these guys actually prepared a lot of materials that I was using while learning this thing before explaining it to you. And I used some of their materials while preparing these lessons for you. So I really want to give them credits and kudos. And I'm attaching the links to their projects in the materials to this lesson. So I would really appreciate if you could go and check it out. And Tone Access, the library that we're using in these lessons, it was also made by Orb's team. So I really encourage you to check what kind of products they do, because mostly these are the most cool for development that you can find. And let me do a little bit of a spoiler of what we're going to do in the next chapter. So we are going to learn how to embed the interface we just built, how to embed it into the Telegram, because Telegram has the concept of Telegram web apps. And you're going to learn, and I'm sure you're going to like it. And another thing we're going to do in the next chapter is we're going to build the interfaces that are not run as a web style, but rather they are run as a chatbot. So the chatbot will be able to interact with your user to actually trigger something on the wallet. So you will learn this concept. You will understand what is the difference between chatbot interface and the web interface, which we just learned with Tone Connect. So I really look forward to the next chapter, and we're going to extend our knowledge to the new extents. So looking forward to see you. Stay tuned.